When firefighters arrived at the Gunness farm in April 1908, the house was already beyond saving. Flames had consumed the building, the roof had collapsed, and little remained but smoking ruins. At first, it appeared to be a tragic accident, a fire, a dead family, a terrible loss. But as investigators searched through the ashes, they found something that made them stop. The body believed to be Belle Gunness was missing its head. And that was only the beginning. Because beneath the ruins of the farm, investigators would uncover evidence that suggested the missing men had never truly disappeared. They had been there all along, buried in the ground, waiting to be found. Did she escape? When we left the story, questions were beginning to surround Belle Gunness from every direction. Men who had traveled to her farm had vanished. Then, on April 28, 1908, everything changed. A fire destroyed the Gunness farmhouse, and as they looked closer, they began uncovering evidence that transformed a local mystery into a national sensation. But perhaps the greatest mystery was not what investigators found. It was what they never found. Did Belle Gunness die that night, or did she escape, leaving everyone to believe she was gone? For years, the disappearances connected to Belle Gunness had remained little more than rumors. Families worried, friends asked questions, but without evidence, there was little authorities could do. Andrew Helgelian's disappearance began to change that. Unlike some relatives who eventually accepted uncertainty, Andrew's brother refused to let the matter go. His name was Asle Helgelian, and he became convinced that something had happened to Andrew after he arrived at Belle's farm. Andrew had not simply wandered away. He had not started a new life, and he had not disappeared voluntarily. At least, that was what Asle believed. The more he investigated, the more suspicious the situation appeared. Andrew had told people where he was going. He had written about Belle. He had traveled to Indiana with money and plans for the future. Then, all communication stopped. Asle contacted authorities and continued pressing for answers. His persistence drew attention to Belle at a time when questions about her were already beginning to circulate. Some local residents had noticed unusual patterns. Visitors arrived at the farm. Then, they seemed to vanish. Not everyone viewed the rumors seriously, but enough people were talking that Belle could hardly have been unaware of them. Whether she felt threatened by the growing attention remains unknown. What is clear is that pressure was building. For years, Belle had maintained the image of a hard-working widow, a respected farmer, a woman who had endured tragedy and continued moving forward. Now that image was beginning to crack. Families were comparing stories. Missing men were being connected to the same property. And for the first time, someone was actively trying to uncover the truth. Yet before any formal investigation could fully develop, disaster struck. In the early hours of April 28, 1908, flames erupted at the Gunness farm, and within a matter of hours, the course of the entire case would change forever. In the early morning hours of April 28, 1908, residents near the Gunness farm noticed something alarming. The farmhouse was on fire. By the time help arrived, the flames had spread rapidly through the structure. The building was soon engulfed. There was little anyone could do except watch as the house collapsed into a pile of burning debris. When the fire was finally extinguished, investigators began the grim task of searching through the ruins. At first, the scene appeared straightforward. Belle Gunness and her children were believed to have been inside the house when the fire began. If that was true, their remains should have been somewhere beneath the wreckage. As workers carefully removed debris, they discovered the bodies of 3 children. The finding was tragic. But it was what they discovered next that transformed the entire investigation. Near the children's remains was the body of an adult woman. At first glance, authorities assumed the body belonged to Belle Gunness. After all, who else could it be? But as investigators examined the remains more closely, they noticed something shocking. The body had no head. The skull was missing entirely. No matter how carefully they searched the immediate area, they could not locate it. The discovery immediately raised questions. How had the head become separated from the body? Was it the result of the fire? Or had it been removed before the blaze ever started? The uncertainty made identification difficult. Without a head, confirming the body's identity became far more complicated than investigators initially expected. And there were other details that seemed unusual. Some reports suggested the body was smaller than Belle. Others questioned whether the remains matched her known physical characteristics. In the chaos following the fire, answers were difficult to obtain. Yet one thing was becoming increasingly clear. This was no longer being treated as a simple house fire. Investigators began looking beyond the immediate tragedy. And as they did, they uncovered another disturbing fact. The fire itself may not have been accidental. Evidence suggested that accelerants could have been used. If true, someone may have intentionally set the farmhouse ablaze. That possibility brought attention to a man named Ray Lamphere, a former farmhand who had recently fallen out with Belle. But before authorities could fully explore that lead, another discovery changed the direction of the investigation once again. Because while searching the property, investigators noticed areas of ground that appeared disturbed, places where the soil looked different, places where something might have been buried. What they found there would turn a suspicious fire into one of the most infamous criminal investigations in American history. The fire was only the beginning. Once investigators began examining the property more carefully, attention shifted away from the ruins of the farmhouse and toward the land surrounding it. The Gunness farm covered several acres. At first glance, it looked like any other rural property in Indiana. Fields, outbuildings, open ground. But beneath the surface, investigators would uncover evidence that shocked the nation. The first discoveries came when searchers began digging in areas where the soil appeared recently disturbed. What they found was not what anyone expected. Human remains. Then more remains. And then more. As the excavation continued, investigators uncovered bones, skull fragments, teeth, and partial skeletons buried in different locations around the property. Some remains were found wrapped in sacks. Others appeared to have been dismembered before burial. The discoveries quickly attracted national attention. Newspapers across the country began reporting on the case. What had started as a local investigation was now front-page news. Reporters arrived in Lamphere, curious visitors traveled to the area, and the public became fascinated by the possibility that one woman might be responsible for an extraordinary number of deaths. Identifying the victims proved difficult. Many of the remains had been buried for years. Forensic science was limited compared to modern standards. Investigators often relied on personal belongings, dental evidence, and circumstantial information to determine who the victims might have been. Among those believed to have been identified was Andrew Helgelian. Evidence found on the property appeared to connect him directly to the farm. For his family, the discovery confirmed their worst fears. Andrew had never left Indiana. He had never started a new life elsewhere. Instead, investigators believed he had died on Belle's property. As more remains were uncovered, estimates of the possible victim count continued to rise. The exact number remains uncertain even today. Some historians believe Belle may have been responsible for around a dozen murders. Others suggest the total could have been significantly higher. A few sensational reports from the period propose numbers reaching several dozen victims. The truth may never be known. But regardless of the final count, the discoveries transformed Belle Gunness into one of the most notorious figures in American crime history. Yet one major question remained unanswered. If Belle was responsible for these deaths, was she also one of the dead? Or had she somehow managed to escape before the fire? To answer that question, investigators turned their attention to a man who knew Belle better than almost anyone else. A man who had worked on the farm. A man who was now the primary suspect in the fire. His name was Ray Lamphere. As investigators searched the Gunness farm, one name continued to surface: Ray Lamphere. Lamphere had worked on Belle's property and was known throughout the area as someone closely connected to her. According to multiple accounts, he had become deeply attached to Belle over the years. Some reports suggested he wanted a romantic relationship. Others described him as loyal, possessive, and increasingly dependent on her approval. Whatever the nature of their relationship, it eventually deteriorated. Belle reportedly dismissed Lamphere from the farm. The separation was not friendly. Arguments followed, and before long, Lamphere found himself at the center of growing suspicion. When investigators learned that the farmhouse fire may have been intentionally set, attention quickly turned toward him. Witnesses reported seeing Lamphere near the property around the time of the fire. His history with Belle made him an obvious suspect. Authorities arrested him and charged him in connection with the case. The trial attracted significant public attention. By this point, newspapers across the country were following every development. The public wanted answers, and many believed Lamphere might finally provide them. Yet the case was far from simple. Although prosecutors argued that Lamphere had been involved in the fire, proving exactly what happened that night was difficult. There was little direct evidence, and there were still many unanswered questions about Belle herself. Eventually, Lamphere was convicted of arson, but notably, he was not convicted of murder. The verdict left many people unsatisfied. The biggest mystery remained unresolved. What had happened to Belle Gunness? In the months that followed, Lamphere reportedly made statements that would fuel speculation for generations. According to later accounts, he suggested that Belle may have planned her disappearance. Some versions of the story claim he believed Belle was alive when the fire occurred. Others suggest he possessed information that investigators could never fully verify. The problem was that much of what Lamphere allegedly said came through second-hand reports. Separating fact from rumor became increasingly difficult. Over time, the case began to take on a life of its own. New theories emerged, old claims were repeated, and Belle Gunness slowly transformed from a murder suspect into something closer to a legend. But legends often grow because questions remain unanswered. And in this case, one question overshadowed everything else. Was the headless body found in the ruins actually Belle Gunness? Or had someone else died in her place? More than a century later, this remains the most famous question in the Belle Gunness case. Did she die in the fire, or did she vanish before it happened? Officially, authorities concluded that Belle was dead. The body discovered in the ruins was identified as hers. The case, at least in that respect, appeared settled. But not everyone was convinced. Almost immediately, doubts began to emerge. One issue involved the size of the remains. Several reports suggested the headless body was smaller than Belle. Belle was known to be a physically large woman. Some witnesses described her as unusually strong and imposing, yet the remains recovered from the fire did not seem to match every description. The missing head created another problem. Without it, positive identification became far more difficult. Modern forensic techniques did not exist. DNA testing was still decades away. Investigators were forced to rely on far less precise methods. As a result, uncertainty persisted. Then there were the rumors. Over the years, people claimed to have seen Belle in different states. Some believed she escaped with money taken from her victims. Others thought she had planned the fire as a way to erase her identity and disappear. Stories spread rapidly. Each new sighting added another layer to the mystery. Most were never verified. Some were clearly unreliable. Yet none of them completely disappeared from public discussion. Historians remain divided. Many believe Belle likely died in the fire. The simplest explanation, they argue, is often the correct one. Others point to the inconsistencies surrounding the body and suggest the possibility of escape cannot be entirely dismissed. The evidence is incomplete, the records are imperfect, and key questions were never answered, which means that even after more than 100 years, the mystery remains open to interpretation. Perhaps Belle Gunness died beneath the ruins of her farmhouse, or perhaps she accomplished something few suspected criminals ever manage. Perhaps she disappeared forever. And if that is true, then one of the most notorious women in American criminal history may have escaped justice entirely. Today, Belle Gunness occupies a unique place in the history of crime. Her story has inspired books, documentaries, podcasts, and countless articles. Each generation returns to the same questions. How many victims were there? How much of the story is fact? And what really happened to Belle herself? The passage of time has made definitive answers difficult. Some records have been lost. Some claims were exaggerated by newspapers eager to attract readers. And some details became mixed with folklore over the decades. Yet beneath the uncertainty lies a disturbing reality. Human remains were found on the Gunness farm. Multiple people disappeared after traveling there, and families spent years searching for loved ones who never returned. Those facts alone ensured that the case would never be forgotten. Many historians now consider Belle Gunness one of the earliest and most notorious female serial killers in American history. Whether the final number of victims was 10, 20, or more may never be known. But her name continues to appear whenever discussions turn to the most infamous crimes of the early 20th century. Perhaps that is because the case contains everything that fuels a lasting mystery: disappearance, deception, murder, and an ending that refuses to provide certainty. Even now, more than a century later, the story remains unfinished, because the final chapter depends on a question no one has ever been able to answer conclusively. Did Belle Gunness die in the fire that destroyed her farm? Or did the Black Widow of LaPorte leave behind a headless body and walk away into history? The Belle Gunness case began with a simple promise, a promise of companionship, a promise of marriage, a promise of a better future. Either way, the legend of Belle Gunness has endured for generations, a reminder that some mysteries survive long after the people involved are gone. And sometimes, the most haunting question is not what happened, but whether we will ever know the answer. Next on True Echoes. A quiet town, a locked house, an entire family murdered in their sleep, and a mystery that has survived for more than a century. Next on True Echoes, the Villisca axe murders. The truth coming soon on True Echoes. Stories don't end, they echo. What do you think? Did Belle Gunness die in the 1908 fire, or do you believe she escaped and started a new life somewhere else? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every voice matters. Subscribe and step into the echoes of truth. To be continued.